Hello, welcome to Broadcast to Post. If you work in live production and haven't heard of SMPTE ST2110 at this point, you've likely been living under a rock. Short answer, SMPTE ST2110 is a suite of standards that sends fully uncompressed media over an IP network. Typically, when we talk about sending media signals over IP, there is some level of compression or reduction in quality. The SMPTE 2110 has overcome those issues. Well, why isn't everyone in the universe using SMPTE 2110? Just like any new technology, rollout takes time. Time for vendors to release products that support it, time for early adopters to test, adopt, and validate that it works, and time for that initial high sticker price to come down as components become more commoditized and vendors smooth out manufacturing. I'm hoping during this session we're going to get to the bottom of where the heck we are in the SMPTE 2110 adoption cycle. What are the new products available? What are the products that are not as available or invented yet? What have we learned the last few years deploying SMPTE ST2110 solutions? And has the price tag of SMPTE 2110 compliant products finally gotten to a point where it makes sense for small to mid-sized production teams to use it? We're assembling a panel of SMPTE 2110 experts to answer this and more. Our panel includes Keith Vittiger from Panasonic, Stephen Rimich from Riedel Communications, Alon Fryer from Ross Video, and myself, Steve Dupay from Keycode Media. Again, thanks for joining us. We're excited to have our panelists here, and let's just dive right into the questions. This first one will go for Stevie. In the early days of 2110, most adoption was for multicam sports, news, broadcast, that type of stuff. Are the markets and applications for 2110 solutions widening today? Who can use it today? What are the factors driving adoption, or maybe the lack of adoption?
Yeah, so I definitely think 2110 is expanding into a lot of new verticals and uses. Obviously, there's still a really wide use case in sports and news and TV, but some of the versatility of 2110, I think, comes from, kind of the format agnostic aspect of 2110. So for instance, we're seeing a lot of adoption now in post houses, streaming platforms where you need to use formats that are a little bit outside of our normal 422 10-bit formats, right? So we've got a lot of RGB 444, some 12-bit kind of leaking in there, stuff that's not as common in the broadcast world and not as common in routers and pass-throughs and stuff like that. That's kind of making its way into the 2110 world because of the fact that 2110 is by default format agnostic. So I think that's part of what 2110 brings to that, and it's expanding of verticals and things like that.
That makes perfect sense, and it's pretty cool that you don't have to change cabling or much of your infrastructure to accomplish that, correct?
Right, exactly. Right. You have your fiber, you have your 2110 network and gateways if needed, and then you can kind of change back and forth between formats as you need, which is what a lot of post houses are doing, right? So they'll have the pods, they'll have projects that they bring on. Some of those projects will be 422 10-bit. That's totally fine. They'll be 24 frames a second. Some of them will be 23 drop frame, and they'll be 444 12-bit, and they can just kind of spin up and down as they need to.
That's so cool. Alan, we're a few years into this 2110 deployment. It's been adopted for many years now. And it's kind of becoming more native, if you will, more available, easier to install. And in some cases, the prices are coming down. What have been some of your big epiphanies over the last few years seeing 2110 installed in the field and within product development at your company?
Thanks, Steve. Well, certainly it's, we've matured in the technology that we're offering and what's available out there. And as you said, the costs are coming down. But one of the things that we've really learned through a number of installs is preparation is key, that the customers and the sites that are well prepared will really have a greater chance for success. So this means, partnering with a really good integrator or installer, learning for yourself what all the deep technical workings are. And honestly, a lot of the sites that have built their test labs and have been testing equipment and installations for months or even years before their installation. And we find that they really have a greater chance of success than those that sort of come in cold. So that's really kind of the biggest thing that I've learned, is that this is still a very different way and a much more complex method of building our studios, and lots of benefits from it. But we've really got to train ourselves to to be ready for it and be able to support and maintain it.
That's excellent. Keith, what about you? Some epiphanies with 21's availability? I know you guys have some killer products that are now 2110 native.
So yeah, thanks. One of the epiphanies, going back to the previous question, is about the kind of people who are adopting 2110. When we first think of 2110, usually the word is complexity or, network-based, and you need to have a network engineer involved or those kinds of things. And so really, much to my and Panasonic surprise, the number of folks that at houses of worship or in the corporate world that would normally be the domain of simple AV networks that are basically adopting 2110 and robustly so. There's not just a handful of examples, but more than traditional SDI. Again, you think people don't have a huge infrastructure of people on board that can manage a 2110 network. It's going to be too complex for them. But no, they go in with both feet. And so that's one of the expansions to your first question about the number of people adopting 2110. And the epiphany is that the reason those people are adopting it is because it's simpler than it used to be. Again, if you look up some of the videos, as I joke online, it's super daunting to think about going to 2110. But the reality, when most people build it with a simple network, without a huge, paid network engineer on staff, without a huge budget, are able to produce a pretty cool environment that, again, uses all the benefits of 2110. So small scale places, I should say, that have, a handful of sources or a bunch, or again, a house of worship that is somebody you think is surely going to go SDI. They really appreciate the benefits of 2110, have installed it, and making it work for a better part of a year now, and are super happy.
That's outstanding. I think that kind of drives to an interesting observation that while some of the equipment may not be coming down in price, the cost of adoption is coming down. Is right? Would you guys agree?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think the cost of adoption, I think part of that concept too is the idea that like the costs are becoming known, right? So, in the early stages, there was a lot of like, oh, we have to do it this way. And there was an unknown about like what you should use, like what you should use for PTP GMs, what you should use for network infrastructure, and like how to build all those pieces, how many pieces there were, what pieces you needed to integrate there. And I think that generally that's becoming a much more known thing, and that knowledge is becoming spread a little bit more. So it's a little bit easier to kind of get into that world and to spread that out, as opposed to being like, you get into a system, you have a number in mind, and that number starts to grow and grow and grow. And it's a little bit easier to understand like one number to begin with and to go from there, as opposed to just like having, 100,000, now it's 200,000, now it's 300,000, so on and so forth.
Right. That's a great observation. That kind of leads into the next question. And anybody can feel free to jump in on this one. There's a real dilemma that a lot of both broadcasters, general purpose users, the remote people are struggling with is, do they stay with a 3 gig or move to a 12 gig infrastructure, or do they make that jump to go all IP? Do they do a hybrid, a mix of that? What are your thoughts on those, noting particularly that 12 gig has some real issues with cable lengths?
Hey, I'll jump in on that. I think I'm a firm believer in like choosing the right tool for the job. So 2110 has a lot of advantages, a lot of great places it can be used. SDI is tried true. It's simple to install. 12 gig SDI is a simple and economical way to build a facility, and it's also something that can be very evolutionary. So if you're working on an install and you've got a large base of SDI already installed, migrating to 12 gig SDI can be a stepping stone. You could start looking at 2110 perhaps as a way to scale out for larger scale, for multi-studio and that sort of thing. But the hybrid approach is certainly a viable one. With our Ultrix platform, we see a lot of that, where we'll have individual studios that are built around SDI, and much of the equipment is what the customers have had for years and they're happy with it. And then they're building 2110 as a way to make a broader facility routing solution, getting rid of that large monolithic central router. So I think both have their legs. And one of the things that is also interesting is that When we look at like AMWA, which is doing all the NMOS specifications, they're starting to look now at standards beyond 2110 to be supported in their control plane. So being able to manage these hybrid environments is going to become easier and easier in a more unified manner.
That's excellent. That kind of leads us to the next one. Maybe Steve, if you'd like to take this one, is 2110's been out for a while. Most people have a general understanding of it in the various parts, such as audio, signal timing, ancillary data, et cetera. Have there been any significant updates to the standard itself that we should be aware of, or some trends in the industry that you'd want to talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of 2110 itself, there hasn't, or 2110-20 and 30 and 40, there hasn't been like a whole ton of like additions to the standard or modifications to the standard. PTP has some new standardizations. I think PTP v2.1 that it hasn't been super widely adopted in the 2110 world. But if you look at what BSF is continually working on releasing with their technical recommendations, you'll notice that like a lot of that has to do with JXS and with RIST and IPMX. So with RIST, obviously that's like, how to send signals over like WAN connections over public IP. And with IPMX, it's like an interoperable set of standards. And so when you see those things, it kind of gives us like a story of like where we're evolving to and how we're kind of expanding the 2110 world and how that's going to like expand into, sending signals outside of our facility, how we get signals from A to B. TR07 and TR08 are all about like JXS, where TR08 is all about like Essence JXS, and TR07 is all about like transport stream stuff and getting things from point A to point B. So it kind of paints the story of like where we're kind of going with that. There's a lot of things that we've tackled in inner facility, and now we're kind of moving to like outside the facility and making sure that those technical recommendations are available.
Excellent. Is there any other areas that are active right now? Alan mentioned NMOS with AMWA. Some other things that are going on there.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. No.
Yeah. So I mean, MO is active in a number of different areas. I'm working on the activity group that's bringing NDI support to NMOS. There's work going on for MPEG-TS, as well as overall system security and system parameterization and control. So really building this out to being a broader API that orchestration and control systems can use to globally talk to a broader array of equipment without relying on proprietary APIs for each equipment vendor.
I think that's a really good point to bring out. The orchestration layer is really critical, and we've seen some of the major manufacturers really enhance their existing control platforms to support that. We've seen tremendous work from folks at Imagine on their Magellan platform. We've got Nevion that's doing some cool stuff. Evertz is in that game doing a lot of system-wide control, and EVS, of course, with their Cerebrum product, has tremendous capabilities, as does probably the most adopted program or platform in the world, particularly in Europe, and that's VSM from Lavo. So I'm glad you brought that point up. And NMOS is a critical part of that. Having each product be able to be characterized and utilized is really important. That kind of takes us to the next part of this. Is there has to be a bond, a strong link between the networking and the traditional broadcast processing operation kind of stuff, command and control. Networking, redundancy, and reliability all kind of go together. How do you help? And Keith, you mentioned some examples earlier. How do we get engineers to feel comfortable that their systems are going to be reliable, that they're going to be able to troubleshoot where things are? Can you maybe expand on some of the things you were talking about before with the install that you mentioned on the networking and how the engineers came up to speed on that?
Great question. So I'll start off with a scenario in that if we think about 2110, quite frequently people often say, unless you have a redundant 2110 network, then you don't really have a 2110 network. And while an intriguing idea, you found that's certainly not the case. A lot of folks believe that, unless you have redundancy, then surely there's going to be a problem that you will later notice and regret, and redundancy will help you in that situation. But in reality, that's not the case. A properly configured 2110 switch with the amount of data that it's supposed to handle and all that goes with it is a totally robust function system that's going to be hitless and make everybody happy, and continues to make everybody happy. But those situations where, again, if you, for example, derive your revenue from being on the air, such as a broadcast or that kind of thing, one of the benefits of a 2110 world certainly is that you can have a fairly low-cost, redundant network in place. The ability to, for example, if you had a redundant network, because your switches and everything that goes with it is software defined for the most part and needs upgrades, a redundant network allows you to upgrade your red network, while the blue network can essentially carry the load if necessary. And then if everything goes well in the red, then the blue gets upgraded, that kind of a thing. So there's some benefits to having a redundant network beyond what we normally would think of as, oh, there's going to be a failure for sure. And even if it's just a single frame of missing video that I need to compensate for, or something even worse is going to happen. So number one, that has not proved to be the case with a primary only 2110 network. But certainly the benefits that come from having redundancy, and one of the great benefits of 2110 is that it's a low-cost concept when it comes to redundancy, certainly compared to the SDI world, things of that nature. Those are pretty cool. But it all comes back to, as we said before, proper planning, knowing what your switch is capable of, knowing what your network can handle in terms of bandwidth, the types of signals you're going to feed down. If you have the world's best looking 3G 2110 network and everybody says, okay, today's the day we're going to switch to 12G, you may find yourself in a bit of a bottleneck and some flooding. So again, employing the basic tenets of working in the production world, do your homework, make sure the equipment you have is capable of supporting what you need. Probably everyone has been down the path where they hook up a signal in the SDI world and it's great. And then they go and change it to 12G and somehow that cable doesn't work anymore. It's simply because it doesn't have the bandwidth to carry 12G. The same basic ideas are true in essentially a switch and all that in terms of data can be conveyed. So again, doing the homework, making sure you're prepared, usually yields the result you're hoping for. A primary only network, that's great. But again, for those that need it, redundancy really comes in handy.
Excellent.
And just to add on to that, I want to just highlight a point that Keith just made there, is being prepared. And I mean, a -7 redundant network isn't a magic bullet. I think that, we still need to think about facilities, as we always have, that we need our disaster plans, or our disaster recovery, our contingency plans, and test them well. One of the advantages of -7 network is that, it allows these in-place upgrades that, I can upgrade my blue network while my red network is active and vice versa. Make sure you test that. We've done a number of installations where that hasn't been well tested, and they bring down the primary network, and suddenly they realize, oh, these 6 nodes don't actually work properly. So, I harp on this a lot, I know, but test, prepare. And that is really your key to success with 2110.
That's an excellent observation. In fact, that's one that everybody should add to their checklist. If you're doing 22-7 redundancy, make sure that you test the both networks to operate in isolation, so that you're ensured of continuous operation if one of them goes down. That's a very good point. Any thoughts on that from your side, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with all the points that have been previously stated. I think doing your research and developing your network based off of your specific need is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle when you're deploying 2110. 2022-7 is awesome, but even more so than that, it's how you're going to develop the network. And Arista and Cisco have white papers for deploying networks in heavy media environments, and that stuff covers how do you segment your network? Is it going to be layer 2? Is it going to be layer 3? How do you implement PTP? In what way do you implement PTP? And so I think those resources are really good to kind of know that they're out there and be able to do some of that research on your own before you kind of start to do the testing and wrecking of your own internal system.
Great observation. That leads me to the next question. There's if we're dealing with a hybrid facility or we're making a transition, there's a need for a lot of gateways, and just kind of want to get everybody's opinion on, is the number of gateways needed increasing, decreasing, kind of staying static? What are you finding in actual deployments? And Stevie, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of what Riedel's been dealing with a lot right now is a lot of hybrid workflows. Like, we deal with a lot of workflows where there's some pieces of equipment that are 2110, there's some pieces of equipment that aren't, but right at the point where we are right now, there's almost always going to be some FDIs laying around that you're going to have to integrate in some way, and that's kind of where that hybrid scenario works. But a lot of what we've been dealing with right now is like, hey, you want a 512 by 512. Half of that, 256 by 256 of that, may be native 2110 signals, but then you've got a truck dock that you want to implement some SDI gateways in. Then maybe you have, some ingest or like sending satellite stuff that you have in another location that's going to be SDI as well. So it really just depends. I think very commonly we're still sitting in kind of a hybrid situation as people are kind of going to 2110. And I think that also kind of lowers the, it's not quite as scary, right? Because you're not entirely in a 2110 world. You can kind of go halfway and then you can slowly kind of move your way over. It gives a nice path for upgrading and getting to that full 2110 environment as you kind of move.
Excellent. Alan, what do you think? A full station going 2110 versus an individual studio going 2110, cost impact, some of those kinds of things. What's your guys' approach?
Well, we really look at what does the installation already have, and how does it make sense to migrate it to where they want to be. So, if they've got a lot of investment in SDI gear and they want to maintain a bunch of that, then a hybrid approach absolutely makes sense. In many cases, staying locally within a studio or within a small workflow area as SDI also makes a lot of sense. And just getting back to gateways, are the number of gateways going up or down? I think it's going down slightly, but a lot of them are becoming hidden in the sense that you may buy a piece of 2110 native equipment that has a 2110 line card in it. Well, that's just a glorified gateway. They're not separate cards. They're gateways that are built into the equipment. And what's really important, though, when we're dealing with these gateways, are making sure that they work well in your system. And again, I come back to test. How well do these gateways recover from bad things happening, from switching events, bad formats, bad network streams, timing errors? What happens if your PTP glitches? How do they behave when there are asynchronous signals on the network? And these are all problems that we've seen happen in the deployments that we've worked through. So being able to anticipate them and making sure that the equipment that you've chosen is actually going to work in these situations, and you've got the kinks ironed out, again, that's your recipe for success. The last point I want to make on that is having diagnostics at these gateways and at these endpoints is a huge time saver. Being able to go into a piece of equipment and see that, hey, my PTP grandmaster isn't what I expect it to be, or I've got a large time offset, or I'm not receiving packets, or I'm, being able to get these diagnostic information at the endpoint can really help troubleshooting in issues as you debug and maintain the system.
Excellent. Keith, some thoughts from your perspective, from Panasonic and your deployments?
So a couple things. One, circling way back to a previous question about a person trying to decide between 12G and 2110. For starters, I don't know that there's any place in the world that's 100% 2110. There's always some SDI, as was mentioned, and all that, just about here and there. So by definition, every installation is hybrid when it comes to 2110. It's really just a question of how much. But certainly anybody that we've seen making an investment in either greenfield installation or a big retrofit, usually 2110 at its core, is the way they go. Certainly a switch, 2110 based, and then again, gateways where needed, that sort of thing. Then when it comes to the idea of number of gateways increase, certainly in most of the installations we've seen, it's a fairly fixed amount. Occasionally, of course, have additional gateways for those situations where you might need, but not a significant number in our experience. But it's also kind of a side note to that, when any new technology comes out, like 2110 a few years ago, there's only so many manufacturers supporting it. And therefore, you wonder if adoption's really going to take hold. But the more manufacturers jump on the bandwagon, as we're seeing now with the manufacturing of gateways and all due respect to our great friends at Riedel, all this stuff, with Matrox is coming on board, Black Magic and other folks in between and all that kind of stuff. Now you kind of really get the sense that 2110 is here to stay because there's enough infrastructure. The economy of scale kicks in by more people making it, by options becoming available. And so now we have, I think for the first time, within this past year, in my opinion, the assurance that 2110 is here to stay, that it will be adopted but in sufficient numbers, that it's not going to be a fly-by-night standard, and that it's not necessarily an exclusive future for everyone, but certainly a big part of the future for everyone. And as a result, people can rest assured that when they're building their systems, they now have a plethora of options when it comes to just about everything that's 2110 related, everything from gateways, now switches, and new manufacturers jumping the switch world. And again, finally, covering a little ground here in this answer, the idea that, if you have a conventional SDI-based network, you've got scopes to help troubleshoot issues, things of that nature. Of course, there are now scopes in the 2110 world and things, once again, as Al was saying, to help you troubleshoot. If it's all working perfectly at one point in time, doesn't mean it's always going to work perfectly. Just like with any kind of production concept, SDI, 2110, whatever it happens to be. And so having the ability to test, essentially having some kind of analytical tools to help you is a good thing to have. So basically get you out of a jam if a jam were to occur. And ultimately, when you see this parallel of all the things that we kind of know and love in the SDI world now exist in the 2110 world. Making it, like we said before, ultimately easier and more available to most people. If 2110 is only available to the NFL channels or NFL networks in Inglewood and the BBC and Stevie's new hometown and all kind of stuff, yeah, that's fine. But there's not for those people. But if it's, again, expanding because of the lower cost of ownership, because of the reliability, the primary only networks, then everybody is able to do it. And that's ultimately what the whole industry is about, getting everybody on board to allow them to produce what they want in a way that is cost effective and democratize the whole process of production. So again, a lot said there, but I think the parallels of how SDI came up are certainly being seen now in the 2110 world. And just as 2110, or I should say just SDI is essentially part and parcel to production, I think 2110 is on its way there too.
Excellent points. Thank you all. Let's kind of wrap this up, and then we'll jump into the audience questions by taking a few minutes and identifying some of the key gaps that you see in the development, deployment, the field use of the products, and maybe some things that you guys are addressing, how you guys are addressing those problems in some of your roadmaps. Alan, let's start with you, and then if you'll just follow on, Keith, and then we'll wrap up with Steve.
So I really feel that the biggest gap is knowledge. I mean, the information is out there, but being able to, train our engineers that have been, working in a traditional baseband infrastructure for years and years to really deeply understand this technology. To, as Stevie pointed out, Cisco and Arista have some great white papers on how to design and build networks, become very familiar with this, understand how these network components work. It's really, really important. And just as important is partnering with some good companies to help you design that. Whether you're doing a full in-house design yourself, then you need a very strong technical base. Or if you're partnering with an integrator, an installer to build this for you, ultimately you need to really understand this. And at the end of the day, there needs to be somebody who can own this system, so that when you're working through issues, you don't have, oh, it's this piece of problem or it's that problem, where you have manufacturers pointing fingers at each other saying, the root cause of the issue is this. Ultimately, somebody can look at it and say, no, I can look at this methodically. I understand how the system works, and help troubleshoot issues as they come up. And that's going to really help provide a much smoother deployment and ongoing maintenance. And the issues that come up 6 months after the install, who takes care of that, right? When all the manufacturers have gone back to doing their next thing. So again, I just come back to prepare, test, and educate yourself about how this technology works.
Excellent. Keith?
So great point. And the first thing I would say is a follow or continuation of that. There's so many great people in the industry that their whole lives have been based around conventional video and SDI and things of that nature. So I would love for there to be a Rosetta Stone, if you will, to translate all the great things those learned engineers already know simply and easily into the world of 2110, because there's so many parallels. If you wade into the internet and hope to learn 2110 there, it is not always an easy process. But again, there's a lot of things that essentially as a network, or I should say as a video engineer, you bring to the table and may not even realize it, that would certainly help in your deployment of 2110. So first thing I would say to anybody thinking about it, not to be dissuaded by what you might find on the internet when it comes to how daunting a 2110 network is to install, and support and keep running. It's certainly, based on our experience, a technology that is here to stay and one that people have been able to relatively easily put into place. And then in terms of if I had like a wish list of products that existed, some kind of network monitoring tool that constantly was able to pull all the sources, subscribe to streams, checking data, or I should say packets and all that all along the way, looking for conflicts that they were inadvertently created and things of that nature. So it'd be nice just to have a kind of a tool that, like orchestration, is overseeing the entire infrastructure and looking for issues that, as you said before, or Alan just mentioned, may not have existed 6 months ago, but someone's done something and now has created a problem. It can essentially warn you for the issues that will change is made that may seem simple enough, but might have a big impact. So something along those lines would be nice. But ultimately, again, getting people to feel comfortable making the change, or certainly augmenting the 2110 world with, or the SDI world they may already have with the 2110 world.
Great points. Stevie?
Man, your guys' answers were so poignant. I was just going to say that there's not enough, I haven't seen a lot of 2110 video monitors on the market yet, and that was going to be that. But no, I think I do agree though. I think from a knowledge standpoint, there's definitely a gap, and I think that there's some companies that are trying to do some work to bridge some of that. For instance, like Arista does have now, they've just recently released their they have basically like their version of ACE, which is like a training course, but specifically tailored towards like media professionals in a 2110 environment. So it covers multicast, where like a traditional like ACE level 1 course wouldn't. It covers, PTP a little bit. It covers some of the stuff from, a normal ACE course or a CCNA course, but it adds a lot of that kind of stuff to it. So like if anyone was trying to kind of get out and learn more about that in a more like 2110 environment where multicast is, really imperative, PTP is very imperative, I would definitely say look at those kind of resources. So yeah.
Excellent.
And just one more point, sorry, I wanted to add on, is that looking to a number of the organizations like SMPTE and AIMS and so on, they're all working on, SMPTE has a very robust training curriculum that has a lot of resources there that you can take use of. AIMS has been building up an education library for a couple of years now. So those are great resources that, you could tap into and help build that knowledge level.
Excellent. Let's just jump right into some of these questions from our audience. Some of these are right on target of what we've just been discussing. We might want to explore them a little bit further. We have a question here from Q3 Media on how have you been able to ensure AV sync remains correct downstream of production, that is separate video and audio processing paths. Alan, do you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, this is one of the promises of 2110, right? We use PTP on our networks to provide constant timestamps, and all of the media is also timestamped. So in the simple case is those timestamps are going to align those streams, and it all works really, really quite well. Where you have to start getting a little bit more complicated is when you start having the longer AV delays that are sort of more in the realm of what we thought of as AV sync errors in the past, where you have hundreds of milliseconds of delay, and in many respects that comes to managing it in many of the ways that we have in the past by inserting delay lines and so on into our audio, typically to realign. But in the base 2110, that's already been considered, and PTP when it's all properly working is great.
Excellent. Question here from Melting Upwards. If we're already deploying NDI, what indications are you seeing for a move to 2110? I think this is one, maybe Keith, if you'd like to take this one. I think that's a real tough question, because people already have IP-based solutions integrated, or they're starting down that path. Why would they want to look at 2110? What are the advantages? What are the disadvantages there?
Yeah, again, great question. Certainly, we can think of there as being similarities between 2110 and NDI, but we would quickly find the differences when it comes to just simply if your production had a need for quality. NDI, convenience is born out of the fact that it is compressed. And the amount of compression, depending on the sources that you have, the kind of content you're trying to produce and how many stages it goes through in your production process, might not hold up as much as you would like with that compression that comes with NDI. So again, NDI, great standard. Again, that compression makes things super easy. There's a lot of great things in NDI that make it essentially plug and play for a lot of folks. But again, primarily when we've seen folks make the decision to go 2110 as opposed to NDI, it's usually based on the quality and the delay that comes with that compression and decompression through the various parts of your system. So if you're comfortable with the quality that you currently have with NDI, if you don't have an issue with the delay that comes with it as part of that compression decompression, there may not be a dramatic need to make the jump, which is be quite considerable in terms of cost compared to NDI, to go to 2110. So if everything's working great now, then I would say keep that NDI network going, unless of course you've got other need, number of NDI sources keeps growing and things of that nature, and the network might not be capable of handling everything. But for the most part, I would say the need for higher quality, because 2110 is uncompressed in almost all cases, and there's almost no latency to be found, would be the reasons that most people have chosen to go 2110. And in many cases, like I said, there's very few exclusive networks in the world these days. So just about every place we've seen while adopting 2110, the majority of the broadcast has some SDI, and likewise has some NDI. So I think that's one of the things that's going to be common for just about everybody, some combination of everything, although generally speaking, 2110 would be the lion's share, and SDI and NDI would be relatively small in the grand scheme of things. It's not like there's a third of each in any of the situations that we've seen at Panasonic.
Excellent. There's kind of a follow-on to that. Can you mix NDI and SMPTE 2110 on the same networks? Are there some complications with doing that? And that's Stevie or anybody can answer that one.
I mean, I think from a cost perspective, you'll find that mixing them on the exact same networks and exact same infrastructure could be quite cost prohibitive. Like network infrastructure for 2110 is going to be a little more expensive per port, per 25 gig port, per 100 gig port. And so what you might find is that while the networks might be converged in some sense, it might be cost prohibitive to put a bunch of NDI gear on a big 25 by 100 gig network. So that would probably be the main thing. I mean, generally data center level switches like the Aristos, like the NVIDIAs, like the Nexus series are all going to be completely non-blocking. So you're not really going to run into any issues in terms of oh, this switch can't handle it, this network infrastructure can't handle it. If you built a network out for 2110, it'll definitely be able to handle NDI. But what you might find is that it's a little expensive to also expand your NDI network onto that same infrastructure. You might want to hang something off of the edge of that for your NDI network, as opposed to integrating it directly.
I know there's some switch providers that some down market switch providers that are kind of getting into that game. I heard a lot of splash about, for example, Netgear at an IBC. Some thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, I mean the 4250 line and the 4300 and the 4350 line are extremely cost effective switches for what's available. And that's exactly what they're trying to do, right? They're trying to break into that market. They're trying to create a cost-effective switch. We've seen people deploy, very heavy PTP environments on those same switches while also doing NDI and stuff like that. So, I mean, I think that's definitely an avenue that would work really well in that kind of environment.
And one of the things that, particularly with the Netgear series, is that they're actually a vendor that has decided that we're going to address NDI as a market, and they've done testing, and this is much the same as we saw from Cisco and Arista in particular back in the early days of 2110, that they had hardware that was capable, but it wasn't until you really have that investment in addressing the media entertainment space and coming up with those solutions and what are the best practices and what are the software features we may need to add to this network gear to make it work really well in these environments. And Netgear in particular has started to address that for NDI.
Great. Another question here from Bruce Devlin says, how much training should the end user have? And does any end user, and I love this one, does any end user really understand PTP?
No.
Be brave, guys.
Yeah. So the quick answer to the first question is you can never have enough training. This is constantly learning and become better at your craft. I think that's the key. And as far as PTP, I think that you can get to a knowledge level of where you understand most of how it works, but there's still an analog domain to timing that very few people really understand.
Any other thoughts, Stevie?
I think generally yes. Like there's not too much training that you could possibly get. I would continually keep learning. Go to trade shows, go to different things, like go to seminars, learn all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a limit to what an end user might need to understand about the network infrastructure and stuff like that. They might not need to know exactly how PTP works to route signals around in a network, but it might be helpful for an end user to maybe understand that, by the way, this is a network-based thing as opposed to like an SDI, like point-to-point kind of connection that you make. So,
okay. I got another one here from Daner. It says, considering upgrades needed and the break-even point without UHD requirements, 3 gig becomes or remains a good option against 12 gig equipment. And it works as well and is cost-effective as 2110. And do you agree? Keith, do you want to take that one?
Let's have read one more time on that.
His point is that considering upgrades needed and the break-even points, without UHD requirements, 3 gig remains a good option against 12 gig equipment or 2110. Would you agree?
Oh, sure.
I think it's kind of targeted towards the cost effectiveness. Does it really make sense to jump into the 2110 domain or stay with 3 gig?
Yeah, it's a great question, ultimately, and I think Alan brought it up very nicely before. The desire to go to any standard, whether it be 12G SDI, even though you might already be 3G SDI, or to go to 2110, it's entirely based on your production goals. If it's upgrading for the sake of upgrading, then yeah, that's sort of a rare instance. But again, if you're in a position because your existing infrastructure is getting old, long in the tooth, and you need to replace it, that's where you would look into essentially a 2110 world and all the things that might go with it. The longer cable runs, the less cost infrastructure. 3G certainly in a big router. If you had a huge facility, like a 512 by 512 3G router, that's still going to be enormously expensive. And 2110 would, in almost all cases, in our experience at Panasonic, be less expensive than replacing a giant router. But it's a relatively small installation. In a 64 by 64 router, well, then you're probably in a position where, again, may not be cost effective or worth your while, say, to make the jump to 2110. But if there's other things that go with it, again, for example, if you're somebody that does a lot of embedding of audio and de-embedding, and you don't like the fact that all happens outboard of your router, you might prefer the fact that 2110, it's all stream-based. You don't need to worry about that kind of stuff. Again, if your facility is already plumbed with all the SDI that's more than capable of handling your 3G signals, there's no point just ripping all that cabling out of your walls. Absolutely. There's not a compelling argument, you could say, to go to 2110. But again, if you were building a ground-up facility, if there was a huge infrastructure in place, things along those lines, those are the reasons people, I should say, would typically go to 2110. So again, it ultimately depends on your production goals. Certainly if 3G is how you're always going to be, then that's a cool thing. But Stevie said, people like the future-proof nature of 2110. If at some point 3G is no longer good for you, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, upgrading to 2110 now, while you've got the budget to do it, for example, might be the way to go. So lots of good reasons, but ultimately it always comes back to, like any technology, does it support your production goals? If 2110 is the answer, then great, go for it. If your production goals, if you think might be now and forever 3G, then yeah, why bother making the investment? So always support your production goals is the rule.
Excellent. I got another question here from Alejandro Diaz. It says, anybody have any experiences using 2110 for audio-only streams instead of Dante? And this is one that comes up quite often now. What are we going to do with the audio situation? Because we have so many larger facilities that have a separate audio system, but we're seeing a convergence with the engineering staff where they've got to be conversant in both, and having that one pane of glass to control everything, or one approach, seems to be really important. Alan, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, I mean, at its core, the audio portion of SMPTE 2110 is essentially AES67. It's AES67 with a few constraints. So that technology has been around for a number of years, and lots of successful deployments with it. So certainly, if 2110 as a whole is kind of on a facility's roadmap, then doing all of the audio in AES67 and 2110 makes a lot of sense. And there are numerous other affiliations for the AES67. Ravenna, even Livewire Plus supports AES67. So this audio infrastructure can all tie in quite nicely, and then that gives you that easy portability of moving between audio production and video production. One of the major broadcasters here in Canada does a number of different TV sites across the country, as well as dozens of radio stations, and they've gone 2110 AES67 across the board, so that they can have that transparent link from the radio side to the TV side. So it works well, and it gives you that consistent overall control layer that you can oversee everything.
Okay. I got another fun one here from Francois. He says, do you think IPMX might replace 2110? Stevie, do you want to touch that one?
Well, yeah, I mean, like, I think a lot of what IPMX is trying to do is create interoperability within a lot of different vendors. There's a lot to it. Obviously, there's like a compression aspect, there's a networking aspect, there's a timing aspect, and all that kind of stuff. So I think what we're probably going to see, and this was very common, like at IBC we saw this, at NAB we saw this. We had a lot of people come up to us and ask, like, "Hey, are you guys IPMX complacent? Yeah, and are you guys compatible with IPMX?" And so I think what we're going to see a lot of is people having products that are IPMX like capable, in the sense that they're interoperable and they follow the same set of rules and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's not necessarily like a different format. I think it's playing off of AES67, it's playing off of 2110. It's just going to be, a set of constraints that make sure that everything kind of plays nice. That's my understanding. So excellent.
Any thoughts from you, Alan or Keith?
It's kind of I'll call it the gateway drug. It's a way you can get into a 21 style infrastructure And I mean, they're targeting it more at the Pro AV, and an easier point of entry, but playing by the same rules, so that as you may grow into a full-fledged 2110 infrastructure, you've already learned how it works, and there's a degree of interoperability at the network and control layer.
Excellent. Got one last one, and this is a free-for-all. As a guesstimate, what percentage of facilities still need to upgrade to 2110? What do you think, Keith?
Wow, talk about a loaded question. I mean, yeah. Well, one, we'll call it a very bold answer, would be all of them. Because at some point, all facilities will eventually go through some kind of an upgrade. The equipment that any given TV station has now, or production company, or studio, or whatever, is at some point going to be replaced. And depending on how far into the future that is, what is that replacement going to look like? Certainly their trend thus far is that when people replace an entire network or facility, that sort of thing, then 2110 tends to be the choice. So we could make the argument that, again, just about anybody who eventually goes through the upgrade, which is everybody ultimately, will go the 2110 route. Not entirely prophetic to think that every single person out there is going to adopt all the benefits of 2110 over the benefits of staying SDI. But the one thing we do know is that everybody is going to essentially upgrade what they've currently got, lest you go out of business or have no need to keep on the air, so to speak. So if we simply follow the trends, then the majority of those would be 2110 as we go into the future. And as we said before, the cost of 2110 goes down. Its simplicity gets easier, or the knowledge required to put it in place gets easier. So I see it as not an if, but when somebody does an upgrade and what makes the most sense for them at that time. But probably 2110 certainly is the smart money, I suppose, right now in terms of majority. Again, not everybody, but a lot of the folks, more and more with time, will probably go 2110.
Excellent. Well, we are out of all time today. We burned the whole time here. I want to thank Keith, Stevie, and Alan for joining us today. Also, a big thanks to our partner sponsors, Panasonic, Riedel, and Ross Video. If you found this to be of value, please like and subscribe to Keycode Media on your social channels. And if you have any upcoming infrastructure upgrades, hit that contact button, and our rapid response team will get the conversation moving with you. See you next time. Thanks.
Thanks for watching Broadcast to Post. Please make sure to subscribe to the podcast to receive future episodes. Follow Keycode Media on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram to receive news on additional AV, broadcast, and post-production technology content. See you next time, folks.